Welcome to the first video on key figures of medicine. We're going to break them down into the 4 time periods, so this video is all about key figures of the medieval era. First and probably most important figure would be Hippocrates. He's the person that we start looking at medicine using. So who was he? He was a Greek philosopher and a physician. If he was a philosopher, that meant that he would have debated big issues that need a lot of discussion and have no definite answer, and a physician is obviously a doctor, so he would have been thinking about things that possibly other people weren't thinking about, and that means that he comes up with new theories. What did he do? The key thing that he did was he observed patients. He simply watched people who were ill, and that seems really simple to us today, but actually he was the first person to actually take the time to see and question what was wrong with patients, and that's exactly what doctors do today. The first thing they'll do is to look at you, look at your symptoms, ask you questions in order to figure out what's wrong with you. And by observing patients, Hippocrates noticed things like their day-to-day life, their diet, what they come in contact with, that can affect their health. And he also noticed that when somebody is ill, one of the common symptoms is liquids trying to escape the body, whether that's sweat from a fever or snot from your nose or sickness. So he came up with this theory called the theory of the 4 humours. 4 humours basically means 4 liquids. He believed that the body was made up of 4 liquids: yellow bile, which we believe is pus, black bile, which is waste, phlegm, and blood. And he said that you were ill because one of these 4 humours was out of balance. Either you had too much of it and it was trying to come out of your body, like when you have a cold, you got a lot of phlegm coming out of your body, or you didn't have enough of it. So this has had a massive impact on medicine. It kind of made sense to a lot of people back then, and they could apply it to a lot of different illnesses. And later, Galen is going to adapt it as well. So it was changed a little bit and used for hundreds and hundreds of years. So even though Hippocrates was around in ancient Greece, his theory is being used and put into practice in the medieval era. He also said that illness had a natural cause, which would have been a big deal at the time, because people would have believed that one of the reasons you were ill was because it was one of the gods punishing you. Now remember, in ancient Greece there's many different gods, so they would have thought that there was some sort of god that had it in for them, and that they were ill because they'd done something wrong. So Hippocrates, observing patients, kind of proved that that wasn't true, and that there were things that he could blame illnesses on that you could actually see. And then he came up with the Hippocratic Oath, which is a promise, an oath that all doctors take, and they still do today, which is a promise not to harm their patients unnecessarily. So you don't hack into a patient unless you definitely need to. You need to see what's going on inside the human body. It also said that doctors would live an honest life, a good life, and that they would not tell patients' secrets to other people, which is why when you go to the doctors today, you know that the information that you give them is private. So why is he important? He's important because he goes against religion at a time when religion is very ingrained in people's lives, and he uses more science and scientific observation in particular to predict illness and suggest good treatments. So a treatment using the 4 humours would be, how can we bring your humors into balance? And one of the really common ones was, there's too much blood in your body, you would go to the barber surgeon and have a bloodletting, so he would remove some of the blood. He is given the nickname the father of modern medicine. If he's called the father, that suggests that he is the first person, the person that created what we would consider to be modern medicine. Next key figure is then Galen. So Galen and Hippocrates have a lot in common. Galen is actually Greek, but he's more famous in ancient Rome. He was a doctor to one of the emperors, and he also was a physician to the gladiators who would have been fighting each other in the Colosseums and places like that. What did he do? So as well as being a physician, he wrote down the theory of the four humours. Now we know when people write something down, again, it's very simple, but so important, because it means that those ideas can be passed down to people. And that is why the theory of the four humours has lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. He also added to the theory of four humours, using opposites to treat. So if one of the humours was out of balance, he assigned, elements and times of year were assigned to each of the humours. So phlegm would be assigned to it being cold and wet. So if you were using the opposites, you would have to treat it using something dry and warm. And this could be things like hot teas, change of diet, put it next to a fire, spices. It can be a lot of different things that you could use as an opposite. And he also specialised in wounds because of his work with gladiators. He experimented a lot cutting up animals. He was obsessed with the skeleton of the human body because he wanted to have a better understanding of what made up the human body and how did it work. Now, because you're not allowed to cut up humans back then because of religion, his work isn't going to be 100% accurate because he only really was allowed to experiment on gladiators. He wished he could, on animals. So why is he important? He made sure Hippocrates' ideas were written down and passed on. He helped to really establish the four humours by writing them down and by adding to them. And by experimenting on animals, he discovered that the brain controls the body and not the heart, as it was believed. They believed that the liver was the centre of the body, which we now know as the heart. So they thought that the liver made new blood, but it's the heart that pumps blood continuously around the body. But he did prove by cutting up a pig, and he was looking at the nerves in a pig and how the nerves, if you cut a certain one, he can't move or he can't speak anymore. And that proved that the nerves were sending messages from the brain to different parts of the body. He therefore proved that the brain is the brain is the organ that's in charge of the body. Okay, next kind of group of people that are important would be the barber surgeons. Now, we don't have any proper names for any of them. I'm sure if you did some research you could find some, but in general, as a group of people, they're key. So who were they? They were people who would be allowed to perform minor surgery during the medieval era. Now that's because they were the only ones that had sharp tools. So they would have a belt with like a saw and a pliers and scissors and things like that. And that's why they're called barber surgeons, because they'll do things like cut your hair, but also perform surgery. So what type of surgery would they do? Bloodlettings, obviously. So you would use a sharp knife to cut a vein, an artery, and then they would kind of put a bowl underneath and collect blood like that. And that's how they would measure how much blood to take out. People would go for regular bloodlettings, either to stop themselves from getting ill by keeping their humours in balance, or if they were already ill, they wanted to let out bad blood. Do things like pulling teeth, so they were dentists. Trepanation drill is probably the scariest one. So that was a drill that could drill a hole in the skull, and that was done for a lot of mental illnesses that they didn't fully understand, or anything that they blamed on superstition or God's punishment. And then other surgeries like eye cataracts, so removing cataracts from the eye. There's even stories of them doing internal surgery. They would have had herbs like hemlock that was quite strong and could knock you out. So there were some stories of them like removing gallbladders and things like that. So some barber surgeons would be going inside the human body. Why are they important? Though they were allowed to perform minor surgery very early on in medicine, they tried to use pain relief and antiseptics. It wasn't that they didn't even bother, so there would have been some herbs and alcohol and things. But really their tools would have been incredibly dirty, so if you had survived an amputation by a barber surgeon, then it's very likely you'd catch an infection. And they're important because they show how dangerous surgery was if you don't have the proper equipment and sterilisation and training. Next is Mother Shipton. Now Mother Shipton is an actual example of a soothsayer. So you could say soothsayers in general, or wise women, are key. But here's an actual example of a wise woman, Mother Shipton. What did she, or what did wise women or soothsayers do? Well, they would give herbal remedies to specifically peasants, and that's really important because herbal remedies are very effective and they are cheap. So poor people would have access to medicine that was fairly effective. They would also, as well as giving herbal remedies, give more superstitious-based treatments. So a charmed amulet, an amulet, a bracelet, a necklace, a brooch that had been blessed by the soothsayer, like good thoughts, good luck had been placed on it, and if you wore it, you wouldn't get ill. And then the other dodgy bit of the soothsayer is a lot of them, because they would live on the outskirts of the village and they would talk about good and bad luck and demons, they were sometimes kind of called witches, and some of them would take advantage of that, and they would say that they could tell people's futures. So you could link that to treatment. They would say things like, should I have a baby, or will my baby survive, or will I get ill, is this illness life-threatening, and she would be able to tell you your future in that regards. So it's a very fine link to medicine for that one, and not all soothsayers would do that. Why soothsayers or Mother Shipton important? Well, herbal remedies are often successful because they have natural healing properties. They would be able to help the poor, and they're a good example of mixing religion with the supernatural. So a lot of soothsayers, they were on the border of being like a witch, an anti-church, but actually the church condoned herbal remedies, especially if you matched a herbal remedy with a prayer. So a lot of soothsayers would say that if you take this and say this prayer, then you'll get better. So it's kind of a good example of the two mixing together.